to your seats. It's easier to listen. Well, this is the second in a series of teachings on the Diamond Sutra, a series of 6 on these Thursday nights. And it's my intention in these talks to help you develop a relationship with the Diamond Sutra, not to explain the Diamond Sutra so much. There'll be some explanation or some presentation, but to encourage you to receive the Diamond Sutra as a teaching and to embrace it and to be embraced by it, to enter it and to be entered by the Diamond Sutra. This isn't a way that we are so accustomed to encountering text in our modern world. We have largely come to regard text as a kind of encoded information, and we've been trained to read in a very extractive way. So we read a text and we try to extract the meaning. That has a lot of power to it. There's a lot that we can do with that, a lot that's good about that, but also can be very limiting, where the text becomes a kind of object that is just encoding some other type of information or some core meaning, and we're trying to get it out of the text, rather than this kind of wholeness of receiving the text and being affected by the text and entering into the text and being entered by the text, and a new world appears. We're invited to a new way of seeing things, a new place to settle our consciousness and our intention. So that's my intention. And if sometimes it gets a little confusing, you can chalk it up to that. That's what's going on here. Last week, I started out by emphasizing that the Diamond Sutra is not a book or anything that's graspable. The Diamond Sutra is what the Buddha awakened to. And so we have these fragments of words, we have a text, but that we shouldn't think that defines the edges of the Diamond Sutra. Maybe some of you have seen this puzzle before, where someone will put 9 dots, maybe on the whiteboard or on a piece of paper, in a square, 3 lines of 3, and they ask you to draw a line that connects all of them, the 4 straight lines without lifting your pen up. Has anyone ever done that puzzle before? Maybe I did I did it in a class here, I think. Anyway, it's a very interesting thing. No one can get it the first time until you're told, because the way that you solve the problem is that you draw the line so that it goes beyond the edges of the square. We very naturally draw a square when we see that shape, and our mind just sees it in that way. And that's very much the way we encounter many things. We invest in a clear edge when actually there's the spaciousness. Most of what's there when you put those 9 dots is just space, but we tend to hold it together. So, while there is definitely a book, there definitely is a text. We shouldn't think of the core of the Diamond Sutra as being locatable within the edges of that text. The text is an invitation. And that's what I'd like to speak about tonight, is the text as an invitation, or the Diamond Sutra as an invitation, as a gateway, as a presentation about how all phenomena are a gateway, about how all encounters are a gateway. There are a few different characters in Chinese for this word gate, and one of them is kan, and it's a character that has a lot of different uses. Tea masters will oftentimes, in the change of the seasons, this would be the calligraphy that they would put in the niche of a tea house. Kind of a tea ceremony in Japan is really beautiful, important, and you especially prepare a room, and the calligraphy that's hanging in the niche in a little simple flower arrangement is really part of the tea ceremony, an important part. So in this shift of seasons, that's in the springtime, like right about now, that's a very common character to have there. And it's very interesting because there's another character that just means gateway. But this character means something like the barrier between two things, but also means a passageway through. It can mean barrier, it can also mean gate. It has both connotations. If you think about a gateway in a garden, how mysterious a gateway in a garden is. You know, you're walking through a kind of beautiful place, maybe there's some flowers, maybe a little grass, and then you come across this gate. And on the other side of the gate, the garden continues. Maybe it changes flavor in some ways, or its aesthetic shifts a bit. But it's all the garden, but this gateway does something, is a place, is a threshold, is an invitation. It also can be intimidating. You might ask yourself, should I walk through? Can I walk through? Am I allowed to walk through? All the various things that might get called out by the presence of a threshold. So the Diamond Sutra is like this. Is a gateway, is inviting us into this other part of the garden. But as we see that threshold, we may have all kinds of those same reactions. Oh, I don't understand this. Is this really for me? Can I see things with a mind of awakening? Well, that's only for Buddhas. All the kinds of doubts we might have about our own capacities. All the doubts we might have about the world. Is it really possible to live a life of awakening? Is it possible to live at ease? Is there really such thing as peace of mind, peace of heart? Could I live that way? So it's proper, it's important actually that we encounter that threshold and we go, okay. Because that's the only way it can be an invitation. If it's just the garden, you just keep going along with your own thoughts about life. Well, there's pretty flowers here, I was this, maybe I'll have my lunch now. Whatever it is, you just continue in the way that you were, which is also beautiful, right? But the gateway calls you to something. Part of what the Diamond Sutra is teaching us is that, in fact, all dharmas are just like this. It's not the Diamond Sutra as a text which is the invitation, although that's what we're focusing on in these classes. The Diamond Sutra is telling us actually every phenomena. You know, the Diamond Sutra is like a symbol, is like a representation of all phenomena. Every phenomena is that threshold. Every phenomena is inviting me through to this other part of the garden, to a different center of gravity, to a different way of encountering. They're all inviting you to meet them. All phenomena are orienting you. They're orienting you to something. They're orienting you in something. And this is what the Diamond Sutra is teaching us about. inviting us to. An orientation in the spaciousness of heart, a spaciousness of mind. Inviting us to center. This is something I really encourage you to do in your practice, is just stop every once in a while. And sometimes people will say to be mindful. I think that's a good way to talk about it. It has some downsides. The downside is you think being mindful is a activity of your mental state. Like if I could just get rid of all the distractions, that's what mindful would be. But I'd like to think about mindfulness in a much broader sense, right? That you're centering in the spaciousness of mind. You're allowing your center of gravity to not be caught up in the conflict of consciousness, but in the wholeness of mind. The Diamond Sutra is inviting us to find our center of gravity there, right? Not in the grasping of our sense faculties, our eyes, our ears, our nose, our tongue, our body, and most of all our mind, like our thinking mind. So that's where we're normally finding our center of gravity, in the amalgamation of those sense gates. And we think the objects or the phenomena that arise are objects, and that I'm a subject. And then I center in being the subject. And then I have to relate to all of these phenomena as objects. I need to act upon them or be acted upon by them, or ignore them or be ignored by them. That's kind of the options I have. But to stop every once in a while and say, wait a minute, paying attention is not about trying to get rid of all the distraction. Paying attention is realizing that the inside and outside is not such a clear thing. That all of these phenomena that are running through my being, through all my sense gates, that they are me. That's how I'm experiencing this moment, is because of all of them. A different kind of centering arises through that kind of attention. An invitation to center, not in the gravity of grasping after sense experience, but in this mind which is fundamentally undivided. We have the habit of thinking about meditation or other practices as producing a certain kind of experience. And that's true. If you practice, certain kinds of experiences will come about. And it's good that they do. But when we grab onto those experiences and try to center in the experiences, we also miss something. We put our center of gravity in the experience, and then we try to replicate the experience. And to try to replicating the experience, we put this kind of awkward energy into what's happening. And our center of gravity stays in this project of trying to produce certain kinds of sense experiences. So the Diamond Sutra is inviting us not to ignore experience, right? But to actually shift the way that we are. Not just what we're experiencing, not just the way we're seeing, but how we're seeing, from where we are seeing, the way in which we're seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. Right? So it's an invitation to a place. It's an invitation to a body. It's an invitation to a vision. An invitation to a boundless presence. It's not a limited body. It's not a body we could say, oh, it's 6'2", 250 pounds, whatever like that. Right? It's a body which is a boundless being. It's a place which is a boundless presence. It's a vision which is a boundless encounter, not just the shape of the image I see, where the edges become how I define what it is that I'm seeing, and everything becomes very separate. But an invitation to encounter, to move through a gateway in which we begin to see the world in another way. Now, the experiences that we have in relationships that tell us about our journey, so they're good information, but they're information that help us refine the way it is that we are in the world. And part of this invitation is to remind us that we actually inhabit this body. We inhabit this place, we inhabit this vision. To have a consciousness is to have the consciousness of a Buddha. This hard to measure body of the Bodhisattva, which as I talk more about this and you have a chance to ask questions, we'll go more into the text. But when the Buddha asks Subhuti, what do you think? Is it easy to measure the space to the east? And of course Subhuti says no. He says, what do you think? Is it easy to measure the space to the west or to the north or to the south or to the above or below? Of course, it's not easy to measure. It's immeasurable. Right? He says, this is the body of the Bodhisattva. This is the merit body of the Bodhisattva. Hard to measure. I like that expression better than boundless. You know, boundless is we just equate it with infinity or something. You know? But when we say hard to measure, we realize like the activity of trying to find the edge of it is always foiled. And we can't find the edge of it. And that's frustrating. You know, phenomena are frustrating because we can't find the edge of them when we want to own them, when we want to possess them, when we want to be able to interact with them as objects. And so we suffer because of that. But there's another truth to that to not be able to find their edges is their total freedom, is their generosity to us, to present themselves fully. And that foils our small plans, which is a great generosity, a great compassion of all these phenomena, all these dharmas that appear to us. So we're actually living in that place. You know, we see the gate in the garden. Is the Buddha on the other side of the gate? Was the Buddha on this side of the gate? Is the Buddha on both sides of the gate? Is the Buddha on neither sides of the gate? All of these kinds of questions start to come about. You know? Is this the side of delusion and that's the side of awakening? The gateway calls those questions out to me. It makes me pay attention to my life, my deluded, confused life. The reason it's so important to pay attention to this confused life is because this life is hard to measure. It is that body of the Bodhisattva. It is the dwelling place of the Bodhisattva. It is the vision of the Bodhisattva. And so, Subhuti's question to the Buddha about practice, he asked him, how should we act? How should we practice? How should we control our thoughts? He's asking a question about how do I get from point A to point B? How do I move from here to there? But the Buddha gives him an answer which is an invitation. It's an invitation like that gateway. Yes, you should walk through. You should live differently, Subhuti. You should change. Walk through the gate. But also, he's saying, Subhuti, where will you go? Can't you see that you're on the other side of the gate? That's where you always are. Aren't I here with you? And so the Buddha gives an instruction. But he gives an instruction about that kind of centering, where we don't just try to cleave off the things that we think are a problem or leave them behind by slipping through the gate and into the new garden, but as an invitation to this place, to this body, to this vision, to this presence, to this being, to this encounter that is already the life of Subhuti. It's already his breath. It's already his thinking. In the oldest text that we have of the Prashna Paramita, it's called the Prashna Paramita in 8,000 lines. One of the most ancient texts of the world, actually. It starts by saying, call forth as much as you can of love, of respect, and of faith. And like I was saying last week, that there are many commentators who will say that the Diamond Sutra is actually just the first chapter of the Diamond Sutra. And the next 31 chapters are a commentary on that first chapter. In the Prashna Paramita in 8,000 lines, I often think that this first line is the Prashna Paramita teaching of 8,000 lines, and the rest is a commentary. Call forth as much as you can of love, of respect, and of faith. It doesn't say imprint upon yourself as much as you can of love, of respect, and of faith. It doesn't say, look at those 9 dots, find the edges, and press them into yourself. And you had better do it right if you want to be a Buddha or to follow the Buddha. It says, call it forth. So this is the nature of the Buddha's teaching to Subhuti. Call forth the love, call forth the respect, call forth the faith. You know, faith is a tricky word, but I think love is a trickier word. Respect is not so easy either. Yeah. So again, we're not looking for the edges of those words. We're looking for the invitation of those words. What spaciousness are they inviting us into? So as you're reading this sutra, and I'm encouraging you to read it every day. You know, that's one of the great things about just working with the 5 chapters. It's going to take you a couple minutes to read. Right? So if you read it every day, and then we gather here on Thursday nights and we talk about it, as I use certain parts of the sutra as I'm talking, it starts to weave something together in your mind in a different way. The garden of the sutra starts to appear. As you're reading it, to think about it as an invitation and to listen for how does it invite me to this way of being, to this body, to this presence, to this boundless encounter that is really moment after moment after moment. And there's a certain flavor or type of invitation that's happening in each of these 5 different sections. In the first one, which is labeled the cause and reason for the Dharma assembly, this is the emergence of the sutra. No, it's very simple. The Buddha's just the very simple life of the Buddha. Very straightforward. It's one day before noon, the Bhagavan put on his patched robe, picked up his bowl, and entered the capital of Shravasti for offerings. After begging for food in the city and eating his meal of rice, he returned from his daily round in the afternoon. Putting his robe and his bowl away, he washed his feet and sat down on the seat set aside for him. After crossing his legs and adjusting his body, he turned his attention to what was before him. A number of monks then came up to where the Bhagavan was sitting. After touching their heads to his feet, they walked around him to the right 3 times and sat down to one side. Huineng, the 6th ancestor, speaks of the causes as being the assembly and the reason being the one mind. The cause, all of these myriad beings. Here at the beginning of the sutra, it's 1,250 monks. At the end of the sutra, it's a long list of all kinds of beings. That's an interesting thing to me, that at the beginning it starts in this very human-centered way. And by the time we reach the end, and the 32 marks of the Buddha have been discussed, now it's the fullness of the assembly, the kind of assembly that we encounter in the Lotus Sutra or some of the sutras that are more celestial. But it is this assembly, it is the multiplicity which allows the one-mind Buddha to preach this sutra, or the one-mind Buddha to live this simple life, the straightforward, simple life. If we look at this description of the Buddha's activity that day, and like those 9 dots, we draw a line around it, it's hopeless. We can never do that. We have to be in a particular historical context, particular cultural context, all of those things, to try to just find the edges of the Buddha's life and then fit ourselves into it. That's not an invitation. That's just a dominating mind. The Buddha is actually inviting us here. The one mind, I would say the essentially undivided mind, is in total relationship with all the multiplicity. The mind doesn't reject anything. It doesn't reject any of the experiences that are appearing there as the faces of these monks. How did the Buddha face all of these people? I don't know if you noticed, but people are a real big pain. And there he sits among 1,250 of them and just is. So there's a kind of invitation here about what it means to be with. From the side of multiplicity, to be with the unity. From the side of the unity, to be with the multiplicity. That one does not reject the other. They rely on each other. But our mind is so attuned to this idea that either it's about all of these different things and I need to sort through them, right? Or it's about everything being one. And I want to force everything into oneness, right? Either by destroying the distractions, right? Or trying to squish them all together. So we get stuck in that kind of mindset. But the Buddha can invite us here to another possibility, that the multiplicity of things and the singularity of things do not stand in opposition. And he shows that with the way that he lives. Because he has that mind, because he has actualized that mind, he can simply eat. He can simply wash his bowl. He can simply fold his robe. He can simply sit. He can simply allow his attention to be present before him. So, this is going to call something out in his students. And so Subhuti asks for instructions. So there's the invitation of the cause and the reason of the Buddha's life. There's the invitation of asking. You know, Subhuti says, "Oh, Buddha, it's amazing how you bless us. It's amazing how you trust us." And then he asks a question. This is important for us to see. The Buddha trusts us. The Buddha trusts this hard-to-measure body. Blesses and trusts that we are completely endowed with this hard-to-measure body, this spacious consciousness that we oftentimes do not center in, and yet it is completely us. This is where a question can arise from. Because that body is blessed and because it is trusted, then we can ask the Buddha, what should I do? You know, because we are already the heir to the great fortune of the Buddha's awakening, we can ask a question about it. Not as something over there, but as our own life. And so Subhuti does. He's a great hero that he asks a question. No Subhuti asking a question, no Diamond Sutra beyond the first chapter. You know, Subhuti, as the main questioner in this sutra, it's important to realize who Subhuti was. Subhuti, in the many other sutras, the follower of the Buddha, if it's a wisdom sutra, the follower who would be speaking is Shariputra. Shariputra was foremost in wisdom. Subhuti was foremost in kindness. And so here, Subhuti, who is foremost in kindness, who has called forth that love, right, is asking the Buddha about wisdom. You see this theme in the Prashna Paramita happening over and over. In the Heart Sutra, right, Shariputra is being schooled by Avalokiteshvara. Shariputra, representative of wisdom, is being taught by the Bodhisattva of compassion. This wisdom sutra, right, is called out by the kindness of Subhuti. The compassion of Subhuti is a compassion for us. Not because Subhuti thinks, oh, there's all these people who need this, so I will say it so that I will ask so the Buddha can say it. Subhuti is a bodhisattva. He's not caught in the idea of beings. He's calling forth love. He's calling forth respect. He's calling forth faith. And he knows how to call it forth. It's by asking about it. And then we move into an invitation of the source, the correct source of the great vehicle, where the Buddha gives this very simple instruction. He says, think this thought. Now notice that invitation. Subhuti's question, how should we act? How should we practice? How should we control our thoughts? He could have given him a practice. He could have said, okay, sit for 40 minutes a day, read this, make sure your breath is like this, do that, right? Which is all, that's good stuff to learn. But he didn't say that. He said, think this thought. And then he introduces him, he invites him to a thought which is a no thought. He invites him to a thought that takes thought to its very limits, right? Just like every phenomena is ungraspable, every phenomena has no edge, every phenomena is hard to measure, right? Is spacious. Here, the Buddha invites him to a thought, which is an immeasurable thought, is a boundless thought. He invites him to that source and speaks of liberation. And then the Buddha invites him to a practice. The wonderful practice of non-abiding is the title of the fourth. The non-attachment giving. The non-abiding giving. A generosity. Now, we normally think of practice as being something that I will do, and then this will be the effect. Right? But when we read this as the invitation, as I've been talking about it tonight, the Buddha here is simply inviting subhuti, inviting the subhuti that is us, to function as this hard-to-measure body. This hard-to-measure body that we are, the Buddha invites us to function so. Right? To function as this body which can't be corralled. It can't be confined to the edges that we so desperately want to know so that we can own it. We can do with it as we think is best or just as we want to. How is it that we function as this hard-to-measure body? Is to give a gift. That very simple thing where we take something, as a word, as a thought, as a feeling, as an object, and we just cast it beyond that limit of who we think we are. What a beautiful image of how it is to know about the how difficult it is to measure this body of merit, is to take something of value, and just cast it beyond your reach. It won't do to just like set it somewhere and then walk away and come back and get it. I mean, you got to cast it so that it's no longer yours, that it goes beyond your possession, right? That's a gift. So as we make that gift, it's not just that we make that gift so that we will accrue merit and then be able for something to happen, but that gift itself is the functioning of this body that is hard to measure, that we can learn to center in. We can learn to center in that body that is hard to measure. And there's a freedom there that's very different than centering in the body that is known, that is graspable. So the Buddha says, join in. And then finally, he invites us to true seeing. Principle of Vastness and True Seeing is the title of the 5th chapter. It's a very enigmatic chapter. Keep reading it. This one actually is kind of a sidebar, but I can't find a translation in English that I totally agree with. I'll tell you more about that when we get to peering into that one a little bit more. But it has to do with these attributes and no attributes, like being able to see something and to know it as by the form that it has. Right? That's what we could say, knowing by the attributes. Right? What I'm saying tonight is that even though things have attributes, those attributes are an invitation to something that is beyond the attributes. Many translations say something like, see the attributes as no attributes, as if we should take those characteristics and dismiss them. Like say anything that appears to us like this glass, we should just see past the glass. But that's not quite right. It's that we should see the glass and we should see the not glass. Both are important. Right? So this is the invitation of true seeing, that we don't reject the phenomenal world, right? To try to get some seeing that is just about not seeing. But that we also don't center in the world of attributes as being our center of gravity and just thinking, well, of course, there's a glass here. I can see it, and when Ejo clinks on it, I can hear it. This eye of seeing, I mean this in the terms of vision, physical vision, but in a much broader sense. It has a totally dark spot as its center. Your capacity to see is based in a hole. The lens of your eye, the pupil, there's nothing there. That's why it looks black. I mean, there's a lens, there's some physicality there. But what is black is not an object, it is an aperture. And that aperture is a spaciousness. That's the basis of seeing. And the basis of seeing in a broader sense is that there's a total darkness. There is a non-differentiation. All beings, all things cannot be picked out. And that is the very basis of being able to see anything. Why is that important? Because you turn one direction and you see something and you say, oh, I know. Everything else disappears. Right? To be able to see that one thing, to be able to see the attributes of one thing, requires all of those other things, all of that undifferentiated, to now disappear, or to no longer be considered. So the Buddha invites us here, invites Subhuti. Don't get tricked by the attributes. Don't get tricked by just seeing something. Don't think you could know the Buddha by apprehending the Buddha. But if you just reject it all, if you just destroy it all the attributes, if you just think attributes are no attributes, there's no life. So each of these has a flavor, kind of a flavor of invitation. And as you're reading them, chanting it, copying it, burning incense to it, with it, being entered by the sutra, entering the sutra, being held by the sutra, holding the sutra. Please feel for those ways, which it's calling you, it's asking you to call something forth and to find that center. And what comes of that we can discuss more next week. Are there any questions, comments from anything tonight, but also from last week or this week while you've been living and doing things? Mm-hmm.
When you were talking about the eye and being a whole, it helped us think back to the part where we were talking about the gate and the threshold.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. They feel deeply connected.
Yeah. definitely. And the mystery here, or part of where the mystery or the image for me that is so important is, it's not like there's an aperture and then on the other side there's like this defined space. Actually, the other side is just the garden that never ends. And this side is the garden that never ends. And there's a threshold here. Maybe the threshold's a mirror. Suzuki Roshi, the founder of San Francisco Zen Center and Tassajara Zen Mountain Center, one of the great ancestors of our tradition, modern ancestors of our tradition, in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, he says, we are like a swinging door in space. He's talking about breath. This is another threshold which we can, to study threshold. That's a really good place to study it. It's just like, I used to have this image in my head of like outer space with stars, with this like the kitchen door, you know, you push, and I could just kind of see it going in and out, and studying my breath with that. In many Japanese gardens, the gate that's in the garden, there's no wall. You know, very profound. You're just coming across and there's this garden and then there's just a gate. But anybody, if you want to go to the other side, you know, there's no practical reason. You're not going to keep deer out with this gate, or, you know, kids or anything, you know. It's just a gate. But I think that's how it is actually, you know. There really is there's no fence.
Thank you. I have a question that's a bit tangential. You might want to hold off till another time. But I was curious about the discussion of atoms in the text and atomic theory, and what role, like, the concept of atoms play in Buddhist thought, or what is meant by that.
Were you finding that in this text?
Yeah, in the Red Pine translation.
Yeah. Do you remember which chapter? Just off the.
I don't.
Yeah. Later on, he talks more. He talks more about that. There's one of the places. I don't know if he refers to atoms in this case or not, but in the 18th chapter, there's a discussion of the 5 eyes. The five eyes, and in that one, there's in that chapter, there's this line where the Buddha says, Subhuti does, I'm paraphrasing now, but Subhuti, does the Tathagata, or the Buddha, not refer to grains of sand as grains of sand? And he says, you know, if all the grains of sand on the bank of the Ganges River, if each of those grains of sand was a Ganges River, all of the grains of sand in those Ganges rivers, would the Buddha not refer to them as grains of sand? I find that to be one of the most beautiful parts of the sutra. And he's talking about this total knowing of the multiplicity. Later in that chapter, there's this discussion of how the Buddha knows the mind streams of all beings. Right? But so it's connected with that. Every individual life, you know, when a grain of sand is a life, that every one of those grains of sand is fully known by the undivided mind, that they're completely endowed with the undivided mind. If we come to modern science and consciousness theory, one of the things that has grabbed my attention lately is there's a whole school of philosophical discussion about consciousness called panpsychism. Have you read anything about it? So this is a little tangential, but people weren't beating down the doors with questions, so I'll go into it. There's this question referred to as the hard question of consciousness. And the question is, how does matter give rise to consciousness? Right? Well, it's based in an assumption that consciousness is an emergent phenomena of matter, which is the basic bias of contemporary science, is that everything is an emergent phenomena of physicality. And so from my perspective, it's a conundrum. It's the hard problem is just, when you meet the edges of your assumptions, you can't really solve it because it becomes a very hard problem because it's about your assumption. That's what it looks like to me, but from my just Buddhist perspective. So some people who have researched this, they've started to move and they said, what if consciousness is not an emergent phenomena of matter, but that consciousness is a basic attribute of matter, so that all matter has consciousness, and the complexity of that consciousness shifts depending on the way that matter is constructed and put together. And so this would say that even an atom, a grain of sand, is consciousness. Now, they're trying to construct experiments, and they've done some to make it scientifically verifiable. From a Buddhist perspective, it's just like, I don't need scientific verification for that. I have Buddhist verification for that. So for me, it's not so, I'm excited to read the science because I like it when they catch up. I think there's something in that that's very interesting. All joking aside, I really look forward to the way in which science starts to evolve in that direction and can bring about some other kinds of technologies that embrace that holistic quality of our consciousness. So that's what I'm kind of remembering from the sutra about particulars, and how the one mind and the particular is not at odds at all. That's one kind of a theory of consciousness and matter that's starting to get at that.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel entrusted by something from the Buddha and blessed by the Buddha?
How do I? Just to talk about something very close, just to be here in the hall with all of you. We have this capacity for very direct care for each other's aspiration to live out the Buddha's awakening, and to be able to meet and to discuss something so vital and invigorating is a place that I feel it. I remember when I first went to my teacher's temple, and it's always very simple, actually. I remember going and my Dharma, who is my Dharma brother now, he was in the entranceway, and I kind of sheepishly came in. There was a sign on the gate that said, Zazen happens at this time in the morning, anyone's welcome. So I went in to ask about it, and he came, and I said, is it okay if I come for Zazen in the morning? He was like, of course. Just come at 5 o'clock. And I thought there had to be more. I was like, okay, are you going to tell me the rules? Are you going to tell me, okay, this is the fee? Are you going to okay, here's the guidelines, there's nothing. He's like, oh yeah, of course you can, just come at 5. And then he was just going to turn around and go. And I wanted more, or at least give me some human juice, make me feel like I belong, or whatever. And nothing. He was just like, of course you can come home. And so I came the next morning, and I arrived actually came later. My teacher, he would usually do the service before meditation, which is opposite of the normal. Usually you have meditation and then the morning chanting after that. But he would do it the other way because he knew his chanting was very long, like over an hour every morning, like hour, 20 minutes or something. And so he knew most people didn't want to do that. But as the abbot, it was his responsibility to do it. So he put the meditation afterwards so it was easier for people to come. I'm not so kind, so we put the meditation before and the chanting afterwards. But chanting's not as long. Anyway, and so I showed up and he was doing the morning service. And I'll never forget the sound of that mokugyo, of the fish drum, when I was walking up to the temple. It was the Lotus Sutra, the Avalokitesvara chapter of the Lotus Sutra, and what it told me was not, there's a place for you here, Patrick, as a person, and we'll kind of create this space for you. We'll figure out what your edges are and accommodate them. It was just, I know you. That's what that mokugyo said to me. I can see that you are far beyond what you think you are. This is happening all the time, actually. We have this really rambunctious crew of robins up by my house. I just live a block or so away from the temple. I think one of them is one of the parents, and then there's these 4 young ones, and they're a gas. They're just doing all this crazy stuff all the time, and they're flying around together and jumping in the water and eating and chasing each other around, and they have such a beautiful way of flying, I think this has everything to do with being blessed and entrusted, to be able to be together with them. So, I asked my teacher once what his practice was, and he said to see everything as a Buddha. There's something about that entrustment that's what Buddhists do. They see the world as Buddhas, and in doing that, there's a great entrustment. But that entrustment is also a trusting that our eyes also see Buddhas, even though mostly we don't see them as Buddhas, because again we look for the edges. We want it to look like the edges of what I think of as a Buddha. But our vision is clouded by that. Anyway, I can talk like that forever, sorry. Okay, so your homework this week is to continue reading the Diamond Sutra and encountering it. And don't be sidetracked by my poetics. I'm sort of given to that, and it has some upsides and some downsides. The downside is, it might just leave you muddled. The upside is it might alight the poetic side of your own heart, and that's a great invitation. But jump in, and next week I'm going to start the talk with some time for questions. So if throughout the week some questions are coming up, or it doesn't have to be a question like what is this or what is that, but it could be a question like I'm experiencing this or I'm unsure about that, anything like that is totally fine. And we'll start there, and then I'll talk a little bit, and then we'll have more time for questions. Because I do realize as I talk for 45 minutes, like, is there any questions? The stuff that you came in with maybe isn't as present anymore. Or it feels hard to ask. So we'll start out there, and if there's nothing, we'll just jump